Hey everybody, it's been a little while since we've done one of these, a video explainer here on Nuts and Bolts, but this week we're covering kind of an important topic, and that is what's happening with the Unity Reform Commission and how it proceeded through the Rules and Bylaws Committee. So of course you're going to hear a lot about this from both sides. People who are very frustrated with changes, people who want more changes, but what exactly is in the final proposal of the Rules and Bylaws Committee presentation of the Unity Reform Commission report? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. And hopefully by going through some of the details, we can take just a little bit of the fever out of the room and start talking about facts. Obviously, anytime that we make changes in the party, anytime there are any changes at a state, local, or in this case a national level, there's always going to be some concerns. But most of these are taken by a lot of people who spend a lot of time really thinking through these provisions to try and make sure we get the best options for the Democratic voters and what we hope looks like for the Democratic Party. So we're going to start with why did the Unity Reform Commission come about and what were its goals. So the Unity Reform Commission came about in 2016 as a result of the 2016 convention. It was a committee that was picked with a set number of members from the Hillary Clinton campaign, or were appointed by the Hillary Clinton campaign, appointees from the Bernie Sanders campaign, and afterwards Chair Tom Perez picked the remaining placements on that committee. The committee was tasked not with changing elections or changing the party, but more how do we make the party better in 2020 than it was to 2016. Now sometimes when we say those things, it frustrates people. What's wrong with the party in 2016? What's wrong with the party in 2017? It's not really about that. Every day the party works to be better than the party it was the day before. That's the way that you grow. I hope most people live their lives that way too, trying to be a little bit better every day than they were before. But in order to make sure that the party looks better in 2020 and better in 2024 and better in 2028 than it did immediately before, it takes a path, a set of directions that give us a guideline for what we should do to help improve the party. So while a lot of people are going to fixate on superdelegates or unpledged delegates, I want to talk about some of the other pieces before we get there that are included within the Unity Reform Commission that are designed to help improve our party. Now, one of those, starting off, is what we call the path to leadership. Now, through the meetings of the Unity Reform Commission, which happened all over the country, one of the items that was discussed frequently by members of both sides was familiarity with the path to leadership. Within the Democratic Party, there are a lot of leadership roles, from precinct committee officer to county party chair, state party chair, state party caucus leader, district party office leader, district chair, district vice chair, state vice chairs, national committee person, federal electeds, governors, lieutenant governors, attorney generals. All of these end up being a role within the party. But what was confusing to a lot of people was how do they get those roles? And if they had those roles, what exactly does it mean? Well, this was something that came up pretty frequently within early discussions of the Unity Reform Commission, as people said that some of the younger people wanting to come into the party didn't know where to go or what role to really find within the party. There's some agreement here on both sides about how do we help fix that? How do we make the party more open for people to get involved? Because we need to build party leadership not for tomorrow, but for a decade from now. And that takes more people who are informed and interested in doing it. So, in order to do this through the Unity Reform Commission, there were several proposals, but some of the key takeaways include lowering the wait period of the amount of time that you have to be on a state committee, let's say, to serve in an office within your state party. Also making it sure that members of a party understand what the rules are if they want to run for an office, so that there's public information that you know, hey, I want to run for a party office. What does it take? As well as guidance on what exactly does that office do? What expectations are there of me if I am the chair of the Progressive Caucus in my state, or if I am the state chair? What is expected of me? This is a complaint that we heard from a lot of people, not just people who are familiar with any campaign in 2016, but going back years, where I know in our state and several other states, people said, look, I became a county party chair and I had no idea what to do. It's one of the reasons why we started Nuts and Bolts. And one of the things that came up was we need to improve that process. We need to make it so that more people understand what's expected of them, and they also understand that they have a chance to rise up within the party and have a say. And by improving the path to leadership, the Unity Reform Commission and eventually the Rules and Bylaws Committee agreed with this and said we can work on improving that, improving information that comes out to our membership to make sure that people know what's going on. A big part of this is also linked to transparency. And while transparency appears frequently within the Unity Reform Commission and within the Rules and Bylaws Committee, it takes a lot of different roles in different areas of the party. Many people wanted transparency involving budgeting decisions, hiring decisions, appointments of officers, but some transparency, in fact, the most basic transparency that more people wanted was just the knowledge about what is the party doing. One of the things that we heard in several of the meetings was that members would come to meetings at the state level or national level, and they had bad assumptions about what was actually happening. They had heard from somebody else who had heard from somebody else. So how do we improve communications to increase transparency? And while that's not directly a part of the final document, that is something that Chair Tom Perez announced to everyone within DC that he was working to try and mend, to try and have a more active press shop that would inform DNC members as well as anyone else who wanted to follow along what was going on, and encourage DNC members and others to help share information as quickly as we could. And I think that's a really strong practice to help improve our party. It's one of the reasons why I attended all of the URC meetings and Rules and Bylaws meetings, and have for years now. And more recently, we've worked to try and disseminate that information by sending them out under the hashtags DNCRBC or DNCURC to help inform people of this process for people who wanted to follow along live. It also gave people a chance to talk to the members of this or get feedback. And I really have to thank everyone who was involved in the Rules and Bylaws Committee as well as the Unity Reform Commission for being willing to talk about this as we went along. So that's, of course, transparency as well as some of the party improvements we had looked at in the path to leadership. One of the other elements that was discussed as we move on is the time of registration. Now, through this process, there was a lot of discussion about what happens in New York State, that the time of registration is very long, and that as a result, many people found themselves boxed out of participating in a primary. Or in several states, we have largely closed primaries with very limited chance to change over. For people that don't know, a closed primary means that you have to be registered as a Democrat to participate. And in some cases, that window was long. In many states, you can register as a Democrat same day. So you walk into a caucus site or a primary site, you declare yourself a Democrat, you can vote in the Democratic primary or caucus. But in other states, that window can be long. In New York, it could be several months. The decision of the Rules and Bylaws Committee, as well as the Unity Reform Commission, was to say it should be same day. States should work to assume and work towards same-day voter registration and same-day registration changes. That means if you're willing to commit to be a Democrat on the day of vote, you should be able to vote in a Democratic primary or caucus. Now, there were several who wanted no registration options. That's the ability to have a fully open caucus or primary, which means you would not have to affiliate. And in several states, that's true. Several states don't really have registration that way. You just declare your intent to be a Democrat and participate. Because of this, the rule is a little bit open for states that don't have that procedure where you register in advance, but it still asks that we work to allow people to participate same day. It's a little bit complex. If you want to ask in comments, I can kind of go through it. I'm trying to weave through this in video here and get through a lot of topics. But that's one of the things that was really decided, to make it easier for people to get in and to encourage states to lobby against long windows of voter registration required to participate in a primary or caucus. The next part of that was also, how do we get more people to participate? Well, one of the discussions was encouraging primaries over caucuses. By default, caucus has a few problems. One of those being that for many people, caucus sites can be a great distance away. My caucus site was more than 100 miles away from my residence. For other people, the problem can be if you are poor, if you are a minority, if you are disabled. Caucus sites can be unfriendly to you. It can be somewhere where you don't have money, time, or really the interest in hanging around all day with people you don't know. I know people with social anxiety disorders who would probably see it as a complete nightmare, but still want to be able to participate and vote. One of the things that I'm glad to say is we're going to have far fewer caucuses in 2020 than we had in 2016. Many states are switching over. Recently, Idaho did, Colorado will. We have several states that are making that change, which helps increase voter participation. But also, we have to look out for states where their state legislature will never pay for a primary, and so they're bound to a caucus. So how do we make those caucuses more friendly? Well, within the Unity Reform Commission, there were some proposals that came out, and the party decided that we can do that by making sure that people could vote in advance and that people could what's called ballot and go. Some people call this Firehouse Primary. We in the Midwest call it Firehouse Caucus. It's a way to allow people to drop a ballot, whether it's ranked choice vote or otherwise, and leave. This means that they're not spending a lot of time at their caucus site, and so it's more friendly for them to be able to participate. It also means for some states they don't have to buy or rent large facilities to house huge amounts of people who are going to sit there all day. They can have a small office where people just drop in a slip and walk out. So there's some benefits for both. But one of the other benefits in this is it allows for us to have a direct and complete count of what happened in the states that remain a caucus. In many caucus states, you don't have this. You have what's called guesstimates. You have, here's who was here at this moment. Some people left. Some people stood around. Some people came in here and there. And so it's hard to get an exact count of how many actually participated. By using this method, the Unity Reform Commission called for us to start having a better count of what actually happens within a caucus. So this is a good way to improve caucus for the states that can't afford a primary or the states where their legislature is opposed to primary. Next on the list, and this is going to be the last one before we really get to the meat and bones for a lot of people, which is the unpledged delegates, is the way in which the party functions. And this is a complex one because it's broken apart from Unity in that there are two proposals on the table, and these proposals are to initiate changes by the creation of committee. One is an ombudsman committee whose job would be to look over the financial agreements of the party and provide information as well as some level of enforcement on practices within the party. Now, in order to create a committee, you have to do what's called a charter amendment. A charter amendment requires a 2/3 vote. So the creation of that committee as well as the staffing of it will be voted on slightly separately because of the voter threshold. So we're going to take it in a separate issue, but it's also part of the Unity Reform Commission. The members who really stood behind this believe that in order to enforce accountability on the party, to make sure that consultants and others aren't running over the party, we need this extra check that can look over these agreements and make sure that we're getting a fair deal or that members are informed as to how the money is actually being spent. There are a lot of ifs and in that, so if you have questions, we can talk about that also in the comments. Finally, I'm going to talk about unpledged delegates. Now, this is where everybody gets really wound up. And I'm going to say something. When you ask people to make a change in something that is very important to them, and that is their vote at a national convention, it's going to cause a lot of heartburn. And it's one that the people who are DNC members and federal officers do a lot for our party. And it goes often unrewarded. In some cases, they can be penalized for it. And so that is the one perk that many members of the party deem unbelievably important. as somebody who also has that vote as a super delegate or unpledged delegate, I know that it's something that does have value, but I'm someone who recognizes that in the end, at least in my belief, our job is to be servants of those who have elected us. And having gone to tons of state meetings all over the country, from South Dakota to Hawaii to county meetings in Iowa and South Dakota and everywhere else, Utah and anywhere we could go, I know that one of the things I've heard from many members is that they want changes. The Unity Reform Commission proposed what was called the convention change. And the convention change was to tell DNC members who were state party chairs and committee members, that's individuals like myself and state party chairs, that we would be bound to the result of the state proportionally. Now, when this came before the Rules and Bylaws Committee, there were three problems that were very quickly pointed out. The first is that this would be a charter amendment change, which would mean it would require a 2/3 vote in order to succeed. There's a lot of doubt as to whether or not it would even be possible to get a 2/3 vote. The second problem that was pointed out with this involved what was called the conscience clause. And that is to say, you can't force someone to vote against their expressed will. In fact, we had something like this happen in 1980, as Chairman Fowler pointed out in a meeting, and it's something that became part of the democratic idea. You can't force someone to vote against their personally hard-held beliefs. The example of that is if George Wallace won a state, you couldn't force persons of color to vote for George Wallace just because he won their state. In this case, the example that was put forward in the Rules and Bylaws Committee was a little bit different. Let's say that your state was won 75% to 25%, with candidate A winning 75% and candidate B winning 25%. You had 4 committee members. How do you break them up? Do you force 3 members to vote one way and 1 member to vote another way, where they will be permanently on the party rolls as how they voted at a convention, even if it's contradictory to their own personal beliefs? That didn't seem like an option that was going to fly. And Don Fowler, former chair of the party, pointed out that in order to do that, we might not just have to have 1 2/3 vote, we might need 2 2/3 votes. That is, we would have to strip away the provisions of conscience clause and then go back with a proposal allowing for this. Now, we never went really far down that path to see if he was right or not, but it was enough where it set a lot of people back to say, okay, let's think about this. So a second option was introduced. The second option was a pooled vote option. It said that going forward, a state like, let's say, Kansas or Missouri or anywhere else wouldn't vote as members. So nowhere on the roll ever in history would it say Chris Reeves voted for X. Instead, it would say Kansas unpledged delegates voted 3-1 for. What we discovered in looking at that option, which was the second option, or the pooled vote option, was that that would also violate other charter provisions, but more importantly, it was expressly forbidden because too often it was used in what was called machine politics, to force people to vote in one way. And that was a concern going back historically, as pointed out by Elaine Kmart. So, both of those options ran into serious complications, as well as issues that would impact the way that the state delegate plan was worked out. In order to deal with that, a third option came about, which unfortunately was called by several the third way. But it's really just the third option that was looked at. This third option was to say to all super delegates, all unpledged delegates, that we wouldn't vote on the first round. That in the first round of voting, only the pledged delegates would vote, and that a majority of the pledged delegates would be what counted to determining our nominee. Tom Perez referred to this in the Washington meeting, the meeting that really picked this up, as the Northstar Agreement. The idea that the voters' intent is the North Star of our party, and as long as we respect voters' intent first, we're doing the right thing. Now, this has several complications and several perks. One of the complications is you're asking a lot of people, including federal elected, not to vote on the first round, something that historically has been very important to them. you're also saying to them that, hey, we're going to change the rules of the party. There are some benefits to this. The first benefit is that no matter how we did the binding resolution, what ended up happening was that we over-empowered white male voters. The reason for this is because the superdelegates that remained, the unpledged delegates in the bound plan, were predominantly white men who were elected to federal office or governors. If you think about it, only if we elect Stacey Abrams this year will we have a black woman as governor. So it's a complete shutout in many cases for minorities to participate in that program. Second, one of the other benefits that we get is due to the way that unpledged delegates are perceived. Early within the Rules and Bylaws Committee, the decision was made, and I thought it was a great one, to point out that the greatest problem with unpledged delegates wasn't that they existed, it's that the way that they were perceived. The news media constantly reports them, they were figured into totals, it looked as though they were making changes and so on, and that led to a media situation which wasn't good. When superdelegates or unpledged delegates were created was long before 24-hour internet and constant cable news and Fox News and everyone who can pick the process apart. So times have changed. By making this happen, by saying, hey, it's only pledged delegates, then you take those people who are unpledged off the table, especially our federal elected. Our federal elected have, during 2016 and even to today, endured complaints, in some cases some bitter posts, emails, threats, and so on about why did they vote for so-and-so, why did they commit so early to so-and-so. Candidates are always going to reach out to federal electeds. They don't reach out to federal electeds for their one vote in the convention. They reach out to a federal elected because they're a person who has sway in their community. They're someone who is important, who knows people who will vote for that candidate inside their district. But this chatter and constant online talk about how they were manipulating the process was bad. So if we step them back out of it, we open up our federal elected who can advocate openly for a candidate, their free speech right, which cannot be taken from them. And we give them the chance to do that without anyone being able to say, hey, you're tilting the election, you're changing the votes of the convention, you're being reported on the Associated Press. And speaking to the Hillary Clinton campaign, as well as the Bernie Sanders campaign, both pointed out that nothing was more harmful for the entire process than the early call of the Associated Press before California. Hillary Clinton campaign believed that it started off a narrative that they didn't want to have and that they thought was inappropriate. The Bernie Sanders campaign was frustrated because they thought it tampered down their efforts in California. Whichever side you believe, by stepping back all of the unpledged, it means that discussion can't really happen anymore. So that's a net positive towards our federal elected. Still, many federal elected will be opposed. They're going to say, why change? Nothing is broken. And I get that. And in fact, I can relate to it. I can see for many people we say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But the problem is, things, at least in perception and the way that we talk about it, are broken. There are going to be constant state party meetings that I attend where activists, the people who actually work and volunteer, donate money, knock the doors for us, the people we really need, they do want to see change. So if we offer them real change that helps improve our party, free up our federal elected, and then provide a cleaner process, that's better for all of us. More importantly, we also sometimes have to change just to make sure that we're moving into the future. We're the party of progress, and sometimes progress is change. And even if change is scary, the right change is good for us. The 2020 field looks to be big, with numerous candidates thinking about running and getting in. The more opportunities we get for them to talk direct to the voter and to know that it is the voter in their districts who are the only ones that matter, we start to change the way that we talk about this. But we also change what it means to be a DNC member and what it means to be someone within the party. One of the questions that came to me from another member is, what is the point of being a DNC member if I don't have that vote? And I want to say something about that. I've never really viewed this as, I have a vote, that's the only reason to be a DNC member. Most of the DNC members I know, especially those on the Rules and Bylaws Committee and members of the URC, state party chairs and vice chairs, are some of the most hardest working, dedicated volunteers I know. They work for free. They're not being paid massive sums of money by the party. I don't get paid by the party. They work because they want to see something better for the party. And I don't think any change in the superdelegate status impacts that. I know that these members will show up, not because of the one vote, but because they care about their community. And they know in the end, they need to represent that community and be that voice. I'm hoping in August we can vote to pass these provisions, especially the main portion of the document, which has to deal with our path to leadership, changes in the way that the party works for registration, and efforts towards superdelegates. We'll have a broader discussion on the other charter amendments, but I think those also need to be considered. But as long as we have an open conversation without a lot of bitter hatred, and we talk about how do we make the party better and how do we win in 2020, I think we all win. So, if you have any questions about what's happening with the Unity Reform Commission, where we stand today, please, feel free. Ask in the comments down below, and I'll try and respond. That's it. Thanks.